Morning, everyone, and welcome. Special welcome to those of you who are participating via Facebook Live, a first experience for me and I think for the Minister, and to those of you participating across the country in National Housing Day events celebrating what we're doing here today. I'm Evan Siddall, President of CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and we're going to kick this off. So, je suis avec...
So I'm here with Minister Duclos. Minister, carry on. So I'm with the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. And we have representatives of over 20 housing groups here. We're in Ottawa, in the community housing unit called Beaver Barracks, to celebrate this special day for the Canadian housing sector, a day during which we recognize the importance of housing to our communities.
Is a chance to acknowledge and celebrate the great work that's being done across the country to improve the lives of Canadians through housing. And importantly, to thank the people and the organizations, such as those of you who are here, who are doing it. So, happy National Housing Day, Minister Duclos.
Thank you, Evan. I think it's a happy day for all of us. Au nom du gouvernement canadien, j'aimerais...
On behalf of the Canadian government, I would like to thank and congratulate CMHC, whom you represent, Evan, for the key work you've done connected with our community over the last month. It was a collaboration that required the cooperation of lots of Canadians, whom we'll be talking about shortly, as well as communities and representatives, some of which are in this room. So it's a great day for the CMHC, it's a great day for the Canadian government, and more importantly, I think it's a great day for all Canadians.
Celebration has generated more than the usual interest with the promised release of the report on our consultations concerning the national strategy on housing. This is a conversation in which we've been engaged with Canadians over the past few months.
Well, Evan, I'm certainly excited, as I said, with you and with all of those that are able to join us on Facebook Live. We are here to share the outcome, the National Housing Strategy consultations. I would like, of course, to thank the folks here at Beaver Barracks for hosting us today. I'm delighted, as I said, to be joined by people across the country, from St. John's to Whitehorse to Victoria. I'm told, in particular, several hundred people are watching us from the BC Nonprofit Housing Association's Affordable Housing Conference in Richmond. So you're far from our sight, but you're close to our heart. J'aimerais également souligner que...
I would also like to emphasize that we're meeting here today on the unceded traditional Algonquin territory.
Over the past few months, CMHC has been helping the Minister and the government reach out to Canadians, to housing experts, and to stakeholders such as your organizations, to Indigenous people and others, to learn how we can achieve better housing outcomes for Canadians. We've led a pretty extensive consultation process.
That is right, Evan, and the response has been tremendous, both in quantity and in quality. Thousands of Canadians have taken the time to answer online surveys and to submit ideas through social media channels. Many others have contributed, as you have, to expert and stakeholder roundtables, participated in focus groups that submitted ideas through the Let's Talk Housing website. Évidemment, le logement est important.
Obviously, housing is key to all Canadians, and I can't wait to respond to what we've heard during our collective work with Canadians over the last few weeks, and my work in particular with the other federal ministers and my provincial and territorial counterparts in order to develop the National Housing Strategy, which will be presented to Canadians in 2017. It is a priority for our government for two reasons. The first reason being that it's a priority within our overall framework intended to strengthen the middle class and to promote inclusive growth and get more people out of poverty. It's also a priority because we know that housing is a key condition for our communities to work.
This year, in last year's budget, $2.3 billion new dollars in new affordable housing investments for the next 2 years. As you know, this funding, this short-term funding, is being used to address what we know to be the most pressing housing needs in the short term. That's going to be improving the living conditions of lower-income Canadians and middle-class Canadians across Canada, and in particular in northern Inuit and First Nations communities. However, we also recognize that much more needs to be done, and that's why new approaches are needed. You have, as with many other Canadian families, you have seen the tremendous energy and the enthusiasm that this re-engagement of the federal government is generating, and that's because families are struggling to meet their basic housing needs. Much of the affordable housing that we do have is old, or at least older than what it used to be, and is in need of significant repair. There are also significant gaps in our housing system that we need to address. Ceci étant dit, aucun ordre de gouvernement.
Having said that, no order of government alone can solve all these problems. That's why the National Housing Strategy is so important, in order to pool our efforts and establish a common vision and common goals. Now, over the last few months, you also know that our consultations demonstrated that there was a lot of will and enthusiasm to do that together. And Evan, once again, I emphasize on the word together, because we're privileged today to be connected through social media, but also with people right here in the room, to tell all Canadians how we will do this work together. The partners and the families presented a series of viewpoints to us that we have now in the report, which we heard.
That have been made to consult with people who live in difficult housing circumstances every day of their lives, and those, therefore, that stand to benefit most from a national housing strategy. We held focus groups with homeless people, newcomers, low-income Canadians, and seniors and people with disabilities, just to name a few. We have also engaged with Indigenous people, Indigenous communities, those that endure probably some of the most difficult housing conditions in Canada. CMHC, with your team, has hosted expert roundtables on rural, remote, and urban Indigenous housing, as well as northern housing. CMHC has also met with the 5 national Indigenous organizations and supported their own consultation forums.
Indeed, I couldn't agree with you more, Minister. Improved housing outcomes for Indigenous people and for vulnerable populations in our country really is at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. Et nous devons mobiliser et
we have to mobilize and listen carefully in order to understand the issues and the possible solutions. Why not talk about the report itself? What we learned thanks to the consultations? Very good question, Evan. There is a clear message that came out of those consultations that you will see in the report, which is that Canadians want better housing outcomes for housing, especially for those who need the help the most. And these results will enable us to support this vision that was supported, and this was a vision that we initially proposed for the National Housing Strategy. Canadians, among other things, agree that all Canadians, all citizens of our vast country should have access to housing, meeting their needs, a house that is affordable, and that housing is one of the cornerstones for sustainable community development and inclusive communities and a vibrant Canadian economy in which everybody can have an opportunity to thrive.
Making affordable housing a catalyst for achieving many other benefits connected to good housing conditions. If people have a home that is affordable, stable, and that they are able to call their own, then they are better equipped to continue their education, to sustain their employment, and to support their family. Affordable housing that is designed and built with other factors in mind, such as being close to jobs, public transportation, community services, public space, daycare facilities, and other amenities, also makes it easier for people to connect with others and to participate fully in the lives of their communities, both the economic and the social and the political lives as well. This in turn has a snowball effect, which revitalizes the economy and contributes to urban renewal and the creation of vibrant communities. Now, no one will be surprised to hear that the issue of stable long-term funding on the part of governments, and the federal government in particular, was raised by many participants. Canadians expect governments to make the needed investments in housing to bridge the gaps between those who can access good housing and those that cannot. Ils nous ont également dit que des solutions innovantes.
They also told us that we need innovative strategies to support our common vision and to help solve the most pressing problems in housing. So the Canadians almost unanimously, well, for those who were generous enough to communicate with us, they told us that the government, Aboriginal leaders, and the private and not-for-profit sectors should work together to pool together their resources and the momentum generated by the consultations that we noticed over the last few months. Canadians also believe that we should pay more attention to collecting, analyzing, and sharing housing data in order to back up this innovation and a common and enlightened decision-making leading to more inclusive, more open, more transparent processes and more accountability to Canadians.
Need to focus our attention?
Yes, Minister, where?
Well, that's a very good question. You're very quick. Now, an excellent question, and let me try to answer. Now, clear themes, as you know, Evan, and as we all know by now, have emerged. On the whole, Canadians agree that the national housing strategy must include measures to address the pressing housing needs of lower-income Canadians and vulnerable Canadians. We need to end homelessness and make sure that seniors and lower-income families can afford shelter as well as food and other necessities. It's more than just about bricks and mortar. It's about giving people the best opportunity to succeed and build better lives for themselves and for their families and for their communities. Canadians also believe that we need to strengthen the capacity of housing providers to promote innovative financing models that will be better able to support the development of new affordable rental housing. Une attention particulière doit être.
Special attention needs to be paid to improving the housing conditions of Indigenous people wherever they may live, including, obviously, in the North. Canadians believe that the solution involves a partnership that is more inclusive and more integrated, and that it requires greater housing autonomy on the part of the decision makers, the communities, and the Indigenous groups. We also heard that the national housing strategy should take care of the growing challenge in terms of affordability of housing for low-income and middle-income Canadians in many communities. That includes having a full continuum of housing options, including rental housing that is affordable, and encourage housing real estate purchases in markets that are very overheated. Canadians finally told us that the solution to the housing problem would need solutions that also integrate climate change concerns.
Consultations did more than pinpoint problems, many of them, many problems we do face, but they also, more importantly, identified opportunities and innovative solutions to address these problems and help focus on measurable outcomes. So all of this information and insight will be taken into account as we move forward with the strategy. Now, it's difficult, as you will know, Evan, to capture 4, even 5 months of intensive consultations in the time available to us today. And therefore, I encourage all of us to visit the letstalkhousing.ca website and read the very impressive, at least that's my opinion, very impressive What We Heard report that was prepared independently, and therefore have access to the more detailed analysis of what hundreds and thousands of Canadians have been generously telling us about housing.
I agree. In fact, I do think it's impressive, and I don't think we're patting ourselves on the back when we say that, because, as you say, Minister, it was prepared by the Conference Board of Canada. So I'm sure what people in the room and our viewers on Facebook are wondering is what comes next. And you should continue that so I can follow. Quand est-ce que les Canadiens peuvent s'attendre?
Canadians can expect the national housing strategy to be implemented. So what shape will that take? Excellent question. The national housing strategy will help better harmonize our efforts with the other levels of government, provinces and territories being our primary partners with whom we'll now be reporting, to whom we'll now be reporting now that the report is available.
Whole of government approach to developing the national housing strategy, which also says that I have the now the obligation to work with my other colleagues in the federal cabinet to engage with them on making sure that the opportunities created by this report in terms of partnering with other partners across Canada, but partnering with other ministers in our government are fully taken into account. That includes, as I said, issues of safety, issues of social inclusiveness, seniors, people living with disabilities, indigenous families, includes addressing public transit connections with housing, includes the environmental challenge that we all know are pressing and important in the minds of so many Canadians. So it's connecting people together and connecting dimensions together. That is the next challenge in building the national housing strategy.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, pour cette...
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for this introduction. Now, let's take questions from the public and from the social media.
Magnificently, and we have questions from around the country. And by the way, I'm very happy to say that Let's Talk Housing, hashtag Let's Talk Housing, is now trending in Canada. So congratulations, we're getting some attention. So the first question comes from Michelle, who evidently is from Kelowna, and her question she posed through Facebook. She asks, there used to be a federal incentive for developers to build rental housing. Is this back on the table? The rental availability in many communities is very low, and she cites Kelowna as an example of that.
Well, thank you for the question, Michelle. As I said earlier, we have a two-step strategy to re-engage the federal government in assisting the housing needs of Canadians. The first step was announced in March 2016, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The second step is what we're doing today, is to build a national housing strategy and embark the federal government over the longer term, in fact over the next 10 years. Now that budget in March 2016 announced two important measures to support rental housing. The first is called an innovation fund. Now the call for proposals for that innovation fund was launched in August. So it's possible for communities, organizations and other partners to submit their application in order to profit from the innovation fund. That's going to support innovative manners of supporting the rental housing system. And the second thing that was also announced last March is the financing initiative, again to support rental housing. That program is going to be launched in the next few weeks. It's going to provide significant lending resources for communities, again, and organizations and stakeholders, again to assist the rental housing needs of our families.
Indeed, and that you've asked CMHC to manage that program for you, and so we'll be making an announcement shortly on applications processes and all the rest of that, Minister. On a reçu une question.
We received a question from Isabel on Facebook in French, which says, what have you heard about helping young families? This is a question that was asked a lot by those who were there with us over the last few months. The challenges in terms of access to adequate and affordable housing is particularly acute for young families because these are families that are facing economic challenges that were not familiar to the previous generations. There is precarious work, salaries that are not always up to par given the needs of these families that have young kids, and there are community challenges such as childcare and transportation and quality adequate public services. So in many of our communities, families have major challenges when it comes to buying a home or even renting at the outset. So the initiative that I mentioned will support the development of the rental market, and that will help them. And more longer term, the investments we'll be making in affordable housing in partnership with our communities and our partners will also make a major difference. Absolutely.
The Nonprofit Housing Association is meeting in Vancouver at their central conference, and we have a question from them. You can see them virtually through the camera. Local governments play an important role in supporting the federal mandate to provide and maintain affordable housing stock in municipalities across Canada. So how will the federal government be working more directly with regional and municipal governments in not only developing but implementing a national housing strategy?
I like that question very much. It's been an important question in my respectful, engaged, and nice discussions with my colleagues from provinces and territories. We have had an open debate on the value of having a more open, inclusive partnership with other levels of governments, including municipalities, with other partners, those that are found in communities that are there, with both a great deal of availability and a great deal of capability to support our investments. So we are going to develop ways and means to be both respectful of our primary partnership with provinces and territories, as well as being more open and transparent and accountable in the use of the resources that the federal government is going to provide over the long term.
And about a month and a half ago, you and I met with the Big City Mayors group of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. There's a question here from from Roger on Facebook, and he says, let's talk about social housing in small communities. What are your thoughts on small communities versus the larger urban centers from a social housing perspective?
Small communities face challenges that are different from those we find in larger cities. Small communities are where families often have more difficult transportation issues, and more difficult access to good quality child care services, more difficult or at least lengthier and more complicated access to good education for their children. So, and of course the economic development of smaller communities is often surrounded with challenges of globalization, displacement, natural resource development. So we know that these challenges of smaller communities are different from those of larger cities, and particularly for housing. The housing stock has also become older in those smaller communities. There are often more seniors. The average age of families living there is often a bit larger. So with age comes a different set of needs and priorities. So we want to be flexible and able to meet those different needs.
Great. We have a microphone if anyone in la salle ici a des questions.
If anybody in the room has any questions, yes, sir.
You. Can we get a microphone around the back there? Just so they hear you on Facebook Live.
So, hi, Minister. David Crenna from the Canadian Home Builders Association. I think the report is an excellent basis for moving forward. I was going to just focus on one aspect of the report that's maybe is implicit throughout it, but that we could focus on a bit, which is capacity building and knowledge generation and spreading best practices and that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering whether we can work together further on building the institutional capacity to do new and different things over time. And of course, indicators will be supportive of that, and also the whole development of forums for research and analysis, and also forums for building partnerships and ventures between the private sector and the public sector.
This is part of a broader ambition that we have for CMHC. CMHC, we hope, will be both willing and able to play an increased role in doing exactly what you just said, providing first better information, and second better understanding of both the situation of the housing conditions of our families and how to improve on that situation in an institutional / partnership manner. So, Evan, that's going to be a challenge for you. Are we ready to address that challenge?
We are ready, and that's a bit of a softball, Minister. Thank you. The Minister and I have had many conversations about this, about our responsibility to build capacity and to convene discussions such as you're talking about, and quite importantly, to build our database and an information flow with Canadians. We've started that, but we've got some work to do, and as the Minister knows, we're going to be giving him a report at the end of the year on our plans for addressing data and research gaps. I saw another question right nearby here. Sir.
John Dickey, the president of the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations. In both the questions today and the report, we see a great deal of discussion of the needs of occupants, residents in social housing, and of course those needs are important. But in addition, we must not forget that 1 million Canadian households are in core housing need. Indeed, many are in deep core housing need, and apart from their social assistance benefits or their very modest earnings, they are receiving no assistance for housing. What did CMHC and the government hear concerning those concerns, and are you able to share today any thoughts as to how the government may address those concerns of those people?
Yes, we have heard the, if I may summarize what you said in a different manner, we have heard two separate sets of concerns. Let's call them people-centered concerns and place-centered concerns. And the people-centered concerns very much turned around what you just said, the fact that what matters are people. So we want to make sure that wherever Canadians in needs are found, they are able to receive the support that they need and they expect from their government, in particularly if they live in very difficult housing or economic circumstances. So it's an issue, and the ideas have been provided around that issue. And now the next step is to see how to digest those views and ideas, as I said, with provinces and territories, which do have a role to play in the way that you just mentioned, but also with the federal government now, which is there to promote social inclusion and reduce poverty as well.
So I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. Josh from Facebook poses one. He asks you, Minister, how will the federal government support community services that go beyond just providing the bricks and mortar of housing?
That's a question that I like also very much. It comes back to the point that I made earlier when I said we want to connect partners together. We also want to connect the dimensions of the lives of our families together. So we know that housing itself is very important, not for pure physical safety, but also because housing connects importantly with other dimensions of the lives of families. So let me take just the example of seniors. For seniors, the ability to transit, to transport themselves, to have access to a safe environment, to have access to home care, to health care, to keep their participation in social and economic life. So we recognize and we've heard the importance of including dimensions in this broad housing agenda. Again, clearly we'll need to partner with the communities to do that. The federal government is not the best designed to support healthcare services and home care services, and doesn't have all the answers and the right answers when it comes to full social and economic inclusion of our families. So the partnership with local organizations, with municipalities and with provinces and territories is going to be key in doing just that.
Absolutely. Microphone's on its way over to you. A question here in the room.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Minister. My name is Michael Bach, Canadian Association for Community Living. And we work with and support people with intellectual disabilities. And there are many Canadians with disabilities who lack access to affordable housing. One of the big challenges, though, is that many people with disabilities are living in congregate facilities, are in acute care hospitals, are in large group homes in the community, are having to go into nursing homes at age 25 and 35. In part, it's because of a lack of income security, and in part, it's a lack of the support services in the community that you've talked about. But there are also many of our organizations on the ground who have this kind of stock, who have expertise in supporting people to make their own independent pathway into the housing market. You've talked about working with governments, with municipalities. There's immense capacity among community organizations, but they're going to need assistance to turn some of their thinking around, their housing stock around, to develop new partnerships. It sounds soft, but unless we build a new relationship and support their transformation, I don't think we're going to be able to get some of those who are in the hardest to serve, if you will, into the housing market. So can we anticipate seeing a relationship with the federal government to support that kind of transformation of civil society capacity, community capacity on the ground? We very much appreciate the commitment to social inclusion, but making that real, building the social infrastructure for it on the ground, is going to take investments in that kind of capacity and transformation.
I appreciate them. I am grateful for your input. Two key words, I think. Proactivity or flexibility and transformation. I'm feeling, as you do, the tremendous ability of our communities to use their human resources and their experience and expertise to support the objectives of governments. And therefore, in that context, we want to be flexible and we want to be proactive in allowing for our investments. I'm not sure exactly how that will be done, but it's certainly a key input we've received in the consultation in allowing for the federal investment to be proactively supporting the energy of communities. Because this is where, as you said, again, the expertise, the energy, and the experience lie very much. The second thing is transformation, because we always want to do better. No, there are things we've learned over the last decades that perhaps did work fine, but could work much better. So learning on the basis of that learned experience is going to be key for advancing the goals of the National Housing Strategy. And we're counting on you for that.
Monsieur Corriveau, vous posez...
Mr. Corriveau wants to ask another question. Hi, I'm Stéphane Corriveau of the Canadian Urban Housing Renovation and the Quebec Housing Network. Thank you. The report is exemplary, and the approach was really inspiring. Thank you for that. A few weeks ago, you were in Quito for an international conference, and the Canadian government signed a declaration saying that basically the right to housing is fundamental, and it was a repeat of a previous commitment by the federal government. In Canada, there are people living in housing that is more or less acceptable, and 1.6 million people living in substandard housing because of the poor quality of the housing. Is the Canadian government, or the question is, what can we do, those of us here in the room and across Canada who are listening to you, what can we do to help you to work to make sure that your cabinet colleagues and your provincial counterparts can understand and accept the notion that housing is a fundamental human right, and that the measures or means of the federal and provincial counterparts will be sufficient to meet the needs, because housing has other spin-offs on the effects on housing, work, health, and all that. So what do you expect from us, and what can we do to help you now and throughout the other steps in this process to ensure that the means will be there for the issues we've identified? Thank you, Stéphane. And I would like to congratulate and thank through you all the other partners who were in Quito like you, but who over the last few months helped with us to develop this report. Because it's a collective result, this report. As Evan just said, we simply put it together. The input is from you, from the communities. So what can the community do in the short term and in the longer term to support our wish to further support what you're doing? Well, two things. The first one is to continue to express your viewpoint in the fora that you can access, and to continue, I think, to speak up about the importance of a more open, more inclusive, and more accountable partnership that is with the different partners who are willing to work to improve the housing conditions of our families. The second thing is more long-term. Obviously, after the strategy has been officially announced, and once the Canadian government commitments in the long term are known, well, be ready. Be ready to answer the call that you'll be receiving, because as I just said, we want to make sure that your energy, your expertise can, as much as possible, help us, help you. Because the Canadian government will always be limited in its capacity to take action correctly, because resources are always limited. What we hope, what we wish is that you be available and that you put your expertise to work so that those resources that will be earmarking have the most impact in the families. Do you want to take another question from the Federation of Quebec Housing Builders on Facebook? After the consultations, do you intend to set up concrete measures to improve access to housing? Well, this is an issue. Access to housing is part of a continuum. Depending on the housing circumstances, we know that when we can help families, and from an economic and a housing standpoint, to take them to grow through the spectrum of housing, then it means that we have a greater chance of ensuring that families who wish to do so can acquire a home. So it's by working on housing affordability and including affordable rental housing, and it's by working also on preserving our social housing stock, and by rehabilitating, renovating, and broadening that stock of rental housing. And it's by working on that whole continuum of housing that we'll be able to support our families' capacity to also buy a home. We know that many of the families wish to do so, but in some communities it's very hard right now. Therefore, by playing on the continuum, and I repeat, by working with our partners who often have an even more important role to play in terms of housing acquisition, and it's the role of the municipalities when it comes to urban planning. That's where we can maximize the opportunities for families that want to buy a home. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions here in the room and your insights into the What We Heard report. I should assure you that we're not ending this here. In fact, CMHC will continue to respond to questions on social media. J'aimerais également remercier le...
Thank you, Mr. Minister Duclos, for coming, for being here to talk about the report, and for taking your questions. I meet the minister regularly to discuss housing issues, and CMHC will continue to support the elaboration and the implementation of the National Housing Strategy, which was enriched by all your contributions and by the thousands of people from one end of the country to the other. On vous tiendra au courant au cours du processus. Un dernier mot, Monsieur le Ministre.
It is a collective outcome from a collective effort. I'm very grateful to all of you in this room and many more outside of this room for your contributions to the consultation of the National Housing Strategy. En raison de ça, vous nous avez aidé à faire les premiers.
And you took the first step towards achieving this vision that is now a shared vision, that is that all Canadians should have access to housing according to their needs, and that should be affordable, and that access to housing is the cornerstone to the development of sustainable, inclusive communities, and communities that will underpin economic development, that will strengthen the middle class and all those who would want to belong to it. Well, welcome, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye.
Well done.